Mary Ellen sat huddled in the corner of the dimly lit cabin, her body trembling from more than just the cold. The wind howled outside, rattling the thin wooden walls, but it was nothing compared to the storm that always brewed inside her home. Her father's footsteps echoed ominously across the creaking floorboards, each step a prelude to pain she had learned to anticipate. At 17, her body bore bruises older than the spring, and new ones blossomed with terrifying regularity. Each mark was a silent scream no one seemed to hear. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hide, but the small, fragile space offered little protection. Her father's anger was unpredictable, flaring at the slightest provocation. A spilled cup, a whispered word, a glance he didn't like. Tonight it had been worse than usual. His shouts had pierced the walls of the cabin like bullets, cutting through the thick veil of darkness and despair that clung to her. The sting of his blows was nothing compared to the ache in her heart, the crushing weight of knowing that the world outside offered no escape. The townsfolk knew of the cabin on Willow Creek, of the man with a drinking problem and a hand quick to strike. They whispered as they passed, shaking their heads behind curtained windows, but no one dared intervene. Mary Ellen had long since stopped hoping for rescue from neighbors, clergy, or even distant relatives. She was alone, completely unbearably alone, as she pressed herself against the wall, trying to soothe the pain that radiated through her arms and legs. Her tears soaked the faded patchwork quilt her mother had sewn years ago. She whispered a prayer into the shadowed room, words barely audible over the creaking floorboards. "Please, someone, help me." Her voice was fragile, trembling with desperation. She did not know who she was speaking to, whether the heavens themselves had ears, or if it was just a prayer meant for the empty walls to swallow. Outside, the wind carried a distant rhythmic sound, the gallop of hooves along the trail. Mary Ellen's heart caught in her chest. She did not yet know it, but fate was riding swiftly toward her. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the trees, a stranger approached, unaware of the horrors that awaited him, yet drawn inexorably toward the girl whose life teetered on the edge of despair. In the quiet of the night, under a pale sliver of moonlight, the first threads of change were beginning to weave themselves into Mary Ellen's broken world. The late afternoon sun hung low over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the rolling hills. On one of those hills, a lone figure rode steadily along the ridge, his silhouette sharp against the amber sky. Caleb Ward, a rugged mountain man in his late 30s, guided his horse with a practiced hand, the creak of leather and the rhythm of hooves the only sound accompanying him. His wagon followed close behind, packed with supplies for his solitary journey. Life had taught him to keep to the open trails and distant valleys. The memory of his late wife's soft smile and warm laugh haunted him with every mile, a ghost he could neither shake nor embrace. Caleb had come seeking quiet, the solace of the wilderness and perhaps a way to escape the ache in his own heart. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. From across the valley, a thin ribbon of smoke rose from the edge of the woods. He paused, eyes narrowing as the scent of something more urgent than campfire smoke reached him. The unmistakable undertone of fear and desperation, carried on the wind like a whispered plea. He rode toward it, instincts sharp and unwavering. As he crested the last hill, he saw the small, dilapidated cabin, its wooden walls worn and gray. From inside came muffled cries, weak and urgent. And then he saw him, a man staggering with drink, hand raised over a trembling girl. The girl's head ducked instinctively, but she couldn't escape the violence. Caleb didn't hesitate. He vaulted from his horse with a speed and precision that belied his size, his voice cutting through the chaos with calm authority. "Step away from her!" The drunken father faltered, startled by the sudden, unyielding presence. Caleb didn't shout or strike with rage. He moved with the steady certainty of a man who had faced danger before and would not be shaken. Grabbing the father with an iron grip, he yanked him back, planting him firmly against the cabin wall. "Not another strike," Caleb said, voice low but unwavering. "Ever." The man's face twisted with fury and humiliation, his spit flying as he growled, "This isn't over." But Caleb didn't flinch. He turned to the girl, gently helping her to her feet, noting the blood at her lip and the terror in her wide, frightened eyes. Her body shook, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline and fear that still clung to her like a second skin. "You don't have to stay here," Caleb said softly, his voice a balm against the storm of her life. "Not anymore." He offered his hand, steady and sure, the promise of protection clear in his eyes. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Mary Ellen's trembling hands grasped something solid, something that might just lead her out of the darkness. Night had fallen like a heavy velvet curtain over the valley, cloaking every tree, rock, and shadow in darkness. Caleb led Mary Ellen away from the cabin, guiding his horse with steady hands. Each step, each careful movement was deliberate. He knew her father would come after them, and the wilderness offered both cover and danger. Mary Ellen pressed herself against him, trembling so violently that she could barely breathe. Her fear was raw, ingrained by years of cruelty. The smallest sound made her flinch, every snapping twig a threat. The moon rose high above the prairie, silvering the grass and painting the hills in eerie, gentle light. The wind whispered through the trees and across the plains, carrying faint, distant sounds, the howl of a coyote, the rustle of unseen animals. Yet it was nothing compared to the storm of terror and adrenaline raging in Mary Ellen's chest. She remained silent, staring at the moonlit horizon, as if her thoughts might otherwise betray her. By dawn, Caleb had found a hidden clearing, surrounded by tall pines that swayed softly in the early breeze. He dismounted and worked quickly, building a small campfire, its warmth promising comfort she hadn't known in years. He handed her a rough slice of bread and a tin cup of water, his hands careful as he dabbed at the blood on her lip and cleaned the cuts on her arms. Mary Ellen flinched with every movement, the reflex of someone trained to fear touch, trained to expect pain. Caleb spoke softly, with patience and weight. "It's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." Slowly, she allowed herself to look at him, at the rugged, weathered man whose presence was steady and solid. After a long silence, she whispered, Why did you help me?" Caleb's eyes grew distant, haunted by a grief she didn't yet understand. "Because no one helped me when I needed it," he said quietly. "I lost someone I couldn't protect. And I won't make that mistake again." For the first time in what felt like forever, Mary Ellen felt the tension in her body ease, a fragile thread of trust weaving itself through her fear. That night, wrapped in the warmth of the fire and Caleb's quiet vigilance, she slept without trembling, without the terror that had ruled her for so long. The darkness no longer felt like an enemy. It was simply the night, and for the first time, she was safe. The mountain cabin rose quietly among the pines, its weathered wooden walls warmed by the steady glow of a stone hearth. Snow-dusted peaks framed the horizon, and a soft breeze carried the scent of pine needles through the open windows. Caleb led Mary Ellen inside, his hand steady on her shoulder, and for the first time in years, she felt the strange weight of safety settle around her. "Stay as long as you like," he said, voice gentle. "No questions, no judgment. This is yours as much as mine." The days that followed were slow and quiet, filled with the rhythm of chores and small, grounding routines. Mary Ellen helped fetch water from the creek, chopped wood with Caleb's careful instruction, and tended the small garden outside. Slowly, laughter began to return, small and tentative at first, then brighter with each passing week. She learned to ride Caleb's old horse, her fear of falling tempered by his calm encouragement. With each new skill, each quiet success, she felt pieces of herself she had thought lost start to return. Yet the nights were harder. Dreams still came, cruel and vivid, dragging her back to the cabin at Willow Creek, to her father's hands, to the terror she thought she had left behind. She would wake trembling, seeking the warmth of the fire and the steady presence of Caleb to remind her that she was no longer alone. Caleb treated her with patience that bordered on reverence, never pressing, never scolding. To the townsfolk below, she was the mountain man's girl, and their whispers drifted up like wind through the trees. But inside the cabin, the world had narrowed to firelight, pine-scented air, and the careful rebuilding of trust. One afternoon, after a morning of chores and laughter that had finally begun to feel real, the weight of years of shame and fear overcame her. She collapsed on the floor, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I feel dirty, unwanted," she confessed. her voice cracking with the accumulated pain of years. Caleb knelt beside her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, his eyes steady and unwavering. "Mary Ellen," he said softly, voice full of certainty, "you're not broken. You're surviving, and that's the bravest thing a person can do." For the first time, she allowed herself to believe him. In the quiet cabin among the pines, with the fire flickering and Caleb's steady presence beside her, Mary Ellen began to imagine a life beyond fear, a life where kindness was not fleeting, where laughter could live in her chest again, and where the scars of the past did not define her. The peace of the mountain cabin shattered under the weight of a storm, long brewing. Mary Ellen's father had tracked them down, drunk and seething, dragging two equally rough men behind him. Their voices carried through the pine forest like a chorus of menace, and the scent of whiskey clung to the air. Caleb sensed the danger before it even fully arrived, his hands tightening on the reins of his horse as the men approached, eyes cold and cruel. The confrontation erupted with the suddenness of lightning. Guns cracked in the night, bullets sparking against wooden walls, and horses screamed in terror. The barn near the cabin became a battleground, its weathered timbers echoing the chaos. Caleb moved with fierce precision, positioning himself between the men and Mary Ellen, who stood frozen for a heartbeat, fear painted across her face. Then came the sound that made her heart lurch, the desperate braying of a colt trapped inside the barn. Without a second thought, Mary Ellen bolted toward the smoke-filled structure. Caleb's shouts barely reached her over the crackle of flames, but he didn't hesitate. He followed, charging through the thick smoke, the heat blistering at his skin until he reached her just as she reached the terrified animal. Scooping her into his arms, he guided her and the frightened colt out through the barn doors. Moments later, the roof groaned, splintered, and collapsed into a fiery heap. Her father, staggering and enraged, fired blindly into the night, his aim clouded by rage and alcohol. A single misstep proved fatal. His final reckless shot met him instead, and he crumpled into the dirt, lifeless. The other men, seeing their leader fall in the inferno consuming the barn, turned and fled into the dark desert, their curses fading with the wind. Caleb and Mary Ellen stood outside, coughing, soot-streaked, hearts racing, watching the flames devour everything. The barn burned to embers, a vivid symbol of the life Mary Ellen had left behind, and of the destruction that cruelty and rage could bring. Yet in the midst of the fire and chaos, she felt a spark of something new, survival, and the certainty that she was no longer alone. Horses whinnied nervously in the distance, but the danger had passed. Caleb held her close, battered but alive, the smoke swirling around them like a veil between the past and the uncertain future. For the first time, Mary Ellen understood the power of protection and courage, and that the life she had once feared might just be hers to live. Dawn broke over the mountains like a promise, soft golden light spilling across the scorched landscape. The fire from the night before had reduced the barn to smoldering ashes, blackened timbers curling upward like ghostly fingers. Mary Ellen sat wrapped tightly in Caleb's worn coat, her body stiff from the adrenaline and smoke, her eyes fixed on the rising wisps of ash drifting into the morning sky. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of silence, heavy but not oppressive, quiet but not threatening. The distant sound of hoofbeats announced the arrival of the sheriff. He dismounted with authority, eyes sweeping the scene before settling on the single surviving outlaw, who was promptly handcuffed and led away. The world was returning to order, and yet, Mary Ellen knew her life would never be the same. Tentatively, she lifted her gaze to Caleb. The trust she had built in him over days of flight and survival now felt tangible, almost fragile in its perfection. "My name. It's Mary Ellen Hayes," she whispered, the words tasting strange but liberating on her tongue. Caleb smiled, tipping his worn hat in quiet acknowledgement. "Mary Ellen Hayes, you're free now," he said, his voice calm but firm, carrying a promise that stretched far beyond the ashes and charred timbers. Mary Ellen's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sun climbed steadily, turning the sky gold and pink. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "I never thought freedom could hurt this much," she admitted softly, her voice carrying a hint of wonder and disbelief. Caleb offered his hand, helping her onto his horse. The animal shifted beneath her cautiously, as if sensing the weight of new beginnings. "That's because it's real," he replied, voice steady, full of the quiet conviction of a man who had seen too much loss to underestimate the truth of those words. As they rode away from the burned homestead, the wind tugged gently at Mary Ellen's hair, carrying with it the smell of pine and smoke and possibility. She leaned against Caleb, chest pressed to his, and felt a security she had never known. The terror, the cruelty, the fear of being unwanted, all of it receded like mist under the morning sun. Caleb's words, soft and firm, drifted over her shoulder, lingering like a benediction. No one should ever have to earn kindness. It ought to be given. In that moment, the past and its shadows fell behind them. The girl was reborn, the man redeemed, and the vast wilderness stretched ahead, full of promise, waiting for the first steps of a life lived not in fear, but in hope.